Today we're going to talk about whether or not we can prove if something is a parallelogram. There's going to be four different kind of ways that you can decide if it's parallelogram, and they're not always going to be worded in the exact way that I tell you, and I'll kind of give you some examples as we go. All right, the first way that we have is if opposite sides are congruent. So you have to have both pairs of opposite sides. So if you know, for instance, like this is 10, this is 10, this is 8, and this is 8, then you can say that it is a parallelogram. Okay, but they don't have to be different. For instance, a square is a parallelogram. So you wouldn't have to say that necessarily this is different than this. You could have all sides are congruent, or in a coordinate plane, then you would say you can measure them and kind of figure it out that way. So the first way is we have both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Okay, if you know that, then you know for sure that it's a parallelogram. All right, the second way that we're going to learn is kind of the same way, but it's the angles. Okay, so we have, if this angle is congruent to this angle, and that angle is congruent to that angle, then we have that it is a parallelogram. So it's very similar. Both angles, or both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Again, a square, all the angles are congruent, so that means both pairs of opposite angles are congruent because they're all 90. Same thing with a rectangle. Okay, so don't just get stuck. It doesn't have to say the exact same words. It just has to meet the criteria that we were talking about. Okay, the other one is going to be based on the diagonals. Okay, so if the diagonals bisect it, if the diagonals bisect each other, again, they don't have to be the same length, but if they bisect each other, then it is a parallelogram. You can do this from a coordinate plane, find the measure of, all the diagonals from here to here and here to here, and it would tell you whether or not it is a parallelogram. The last one, it's a little bit tricky. If we know these are parallel, well, let me give it to you. If we know these are parallel, okay, and that could be from their slope, or they could just tell you. And then we also know that they are congruent. So if we know that they're parallel and congruent, it has to be the same side. These two sides here are parallel and congruent. Then you can also say that it is a parallelogram. Okay? So we have one pair of sides is parallel and congruent. Again, the slopes, you could go from the coordinate graph, the slopes, or they could just tell you, depends on whichever way they explain it to you. All right, so that's how we know if it is a parallelogram or not. You have to meet one of these four things in order for it to be a parallelogram. We'll see if